Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Martha Larson, Manager of Campus Energy and Sustainability of Carleton College. Martha isn't our typical guest on the podcast. She's an engineer and project manager instead of a university president or someone very well known in higher education. However, Martha is an expert in green, and what she's been able to do for Carleton and the environment is nothing short of amazing. For example, since joining Carleton and driving its Greens initiative, the institution has reduced its utility bills by 12%, reduced central plant maintenance costs by 30%. This alone equates to over $1 million of annual savings on its energy bills. Equally, if not more important, they've reduced their carbon footprint by 68% since 2008. Martha joins us today to talk about the what and the how, what Carleton is doing, and how colleges and universities can be doing the same things to reduce their energy expenditures and their carbon footprints. Martha, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Drumm. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, good to have you here as well. We're going to get into a subject that we don't generally do, but given everything that's going on in Washington and other places, we're going to talk about how colleges can get more green. And of course, you've got a great example there at Carleton.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm glad that it's piqued your interest.
And so you're the energy manager for Carleton College. You're in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. How did you get into green? I mean, this is unusual to have a college to have someone who is an energy manager for the entire college or university.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is certainly becoming more common, and it might be just kind of a new title for an old role. But for me, there's sort of an overarching drive, just this respect for this delicate balance between humans and nature. You know, we need each other. So it pains me to see how extractive we've become with our destruction of landscapes, extinction of species. So all of that sort of drives my passion for the work. But I'm also an optimist, so I like to analyze and solve problems. I like cleaning up messes, helping people and nature remember that reciprocity that exists between us. So that's the overarching framework in addition to my professional trajectory.
Well, it's interesting that you say clean up the messes because Lord knows we have made a lot of them of this planet.
There are quite a few.
Yeah, and so Carleton has become a leader in this area. Before we get into some of the things, why do you think that this is important for university presidents to be aware of? Because most of them, I would bet it's not on their radar screen.
Yeah, I hope that trend is changing. There's certainly many reasons why especially higher ed needs to be really tuned into the climate crisis right now. Number one is, I think, the urgency and the increasing visibility of the impacts of climate change make it important to all of us. So each of our students has a personal story to tell, whether it's being impacted by a wildfire or just seeing changes in the weather patterns at home. But especially within higher ed, we have the resources to develop solutions, to research problems, to identify problems, and most of all, to educate students so that they're prepared to confront these challenges in their life, whether it's professionally or personally or just within their communities. That's part of our responsibility in higher ed.
And when we were talking a couple days ago, you said something to me that really struck me. You said higher ed should be role models in many ways for society.
Absolutely. We're seeing that more and more with the commitments that colleges and universities are making to climate research, but also to climate solutions. And on the operations side, as with Carleton, we're implementing solutions that can be replicated and really benefit society at large. And sometimes we have a little bit more freedom because we are going to be around for the long term and we have some ability to do this long range planning. We have more freedom to implement what might be considered more leading edge or even bleeding edge solutions that can then be more broadly adopted by society.
Mhm. And so how did Carlton get into this area? And your role has come along with this as well. I think you started out as a project manager there at Carlton.
I did. My career started in project management. In the late 90s, I became very involved in the green building movement, getting certified and additional education and training. That's really what prepared me to take on the role at Carleton. And here, they nestled the sustainability office in facilities because they were very focused on reducing carbon emissions, which many of that carbon is sourced with the facilities activities. So I'm a project manager, an energy manager, and a sustainability manager all rolled into one.
Okay, well, you divide yourself into three, you've got plenty more time, right?
That's right. If only I had 36 hours in a day as well.
Well, don't we all?
Absolutely.
Anyway, so Carlton decided to go this route. It's very different because normally facilities are buried up inside of CFO functions because it's a cost center, it's not a profit center.
That's true. And I think the change here is Carleton, even as far back as 2001, did publish an environmental statement of values that was approved by the Board of Trustees, just to say we recognize this interconnectedness between our actions and our community and the world around us. And also we strive to be a model of stewardship for the environment. So that framework allowed our president in 2007 to sign on to a commitment with over 700 other schools to become carbon neutral by a fixed date. Carleton chose 2050 and then proceeded to write a climate action plan, which we published in 2011. And that really started the college on a path of a defined roadmap to carbon neutrality, which required staffing. So thus, in 2010, my position was born, and we now have 2 full-time sustainability office staff members at Carleton.
Well, that's interesting because you also had plant equipment that was very, very old, and you're in the process of changing that out. Before we get there, though, let's give folks a little bit of a primer on what energy management means, because we're going to start getting into some of these things, and I think if folks have a better understanding, it might be helpful.
That's true. So energy management really is what it says, the management of the college's use of energy and production of energy. So a big part of that is data collection, data management, data analysis, meter maintenance, so that we can manage what we measure. I also liaison with the utility companies with respect to our utility contracts, our rates, and our rebates for conservation projects. And then fundamentally within the college, we energy managers deal with demand for energy, trying to reduce demand through more efficient lighting, more efficient heating and ventilation systems. And we also try to decarbonize the supply. So the energy that we're bringing in and using to serve the campus, how do we make that less carbon intense? In a nutshell, that's energy management.
Okay. Well, you brought up two things, demand and decarbonization.
Mm-hmm.
So give me some examples of demand and how you've reduced that demand.
Certainly. The best measure that we've found is lighting. That's where we're getting the best bang for the buck, reducing the amount of wattage that our bulbs are using. We're transitioning to all LEDs. And then also we're working on HVAC programs, so heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, ways to modulate fans and pumps so they're not running all on or all off. We look at ways to tweak our control systems to be more responsive to actual outside air temperatures or actual room needs for temperature and humidity control. So it's a lot of tailoring of the systems just to use less energy overall.
Mm-hmm. But you've also done quite a bit in the decarbonization, bringing on geothermal,
Mm-hmm.
wind, things along those lines.
That's true. That's where Carleton, I think, has had our most high impact projects. So in 2004, we're in a rural area. We were able to be the first college to purchase and own and operate a commercial-sized wind turbine. And we saw immediately what an impact that had on our use of electricity. We were serving between 25 and 30% of our entire campus electricity needs from one wind turbine.
Wow.
So that was step one. And, we kind of got the fever with that project. And then as we approached this moment that you mentioned, where we had 50 to 75-year-old central plant equipment, steam boilers that were due for replacement, we had a choice to continue the old way, replace the steam boilers in kind, or study how this would be done in the 21st century. And we chose, after deep analysis, to proceed with a full transition away from steam heating to hot water heating, and then we tied that to a geothermal heat pump and 3 geothermal bore fields. So that was our most recent 5-year construction period. We just finished that last fall.
Okay. What kind of savings have you seen?
We've seen probably a 40% decrease in our total energy use on campus, which sounds hard to believe. And if I weren't looking at the data myself, I would have a hard time believing it. But what the geothermal heat pump does is it pulls the heat out of places that are being cooled so that they can become more comfortable, cooler, and it can deposit that heat directly into our heating systems. So we're essentially using free heat to run the campus, especially in spring and fall when we've got both heating and cooling needs simultaneously. And then when it doesn't have enough heat that it can draw from the cooling systems, it can use the geothermal well fields as a second line of defense. And through that recycling of energy and recycling of heat, that's how we see those reductions.
That is amazing. I never would have believed 40%. Now, I am wondering, what was your energy bills prior to putting these kind of things on versus, what are they now?
Well, as you may realize, there's quite rapid fluctuation in the price of energy, especially natural gas, this past year. But our energy spend is about $2 million a year, which is on average about $1 per square foot. So the energy spend is coming down maybe 12% because what we've done is it's not aligning exactly with that 40% because we're also shifting. So we're shifting the use of natural gas in boilers, and we're moving that to the use of electricity in the heat pump. So the cost isn't really a one-for-one relationship, but we are saving money on our energy use.
Well, you said you've got a $2 million energy budget, right?
Yes, on average for the utility prices. Yep.
So instead of spending $2 million, you're spending, 1.8 million?
Mm-hmm, something like that.
Or less than that?
Yeah, it's a significant savings.
If you don't have to spend an additional $200,000, that's how many students, how many faculty, how many more employees? That's a big number.
Yeah, I'll point out, Drumm, that actually with our project, the bigger savings came in our operating expenses because previously we were a high pressure steam plant. In the state of Minnesota, that requires us to have our maintenance staff here. The boiler operators had to be here 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Holidays, weekends. If somebody couldn't show up because they were sick or they got stuck in a snowstorm, the guy before them had to stay for a double shift because the boilers could never be without an attendant. So this project relieves that burden by transitioning to hot water boilers. They're safer and simpler to operate. And so our boiler operators can work a day shift from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's a much more sane working environment for them. And Carlton is not paying for this 365-day round-the-clock coverage.
Mm-hmm. So right there, you're cutting, 2/3 off of your maintenance budget. Not your maintenance, but your staffing.
Yeah, probably 1/3 off of the central plant O&M budget, operating and maintenance budget.
Okay. So what was that before?
Oh, trivia that I don't know, Drumm. I don't have it all right up in my head. But
I'm trying to get a number. So essentially what you're telling me, and I'm just going to take a wag at that, a wild guess, is if you lose 12, reducing 12% because of, the types of energy you're using and the balancing, if you're dropping another 1/3 off of that, you're talking reducing operating cost and budget probably by close to 30 to 40% would be my guess.
Yeah, actually, I should clarify that. That 2 million is just for the cost of natural gas and electricity, purchased utilities that we buy from the public grid.
Mm-hmm.
The operation and maintenance cost is a combination of compensation for the staff and also just the equipment costs, replacement parts, etc. That's a whole different budget than our utility budget. So, we're talking about projected savings of $800,000 to $1 million a year in the combined effect of maintenance savings on the operating budget and the budget for utilities.
And how many square feet do you have, and how many students, employees, etc.?
We have about 2 million square feet total.
Okay.
And we have about 2,000 students. Now, many of those students, maybe a few hundred, are usually off campus on study abroad programs. But on top of that, we usually have anywhere between 600 to 800 employees, both staff and faculty.
So you're talking about 2,500 people on campus at a given time, come see, come si, and you're talking about 2 million square feet. Being able to save 800,000 to $1 million in that is, it's not chump change.
No, it was a significant and conscientious decision on our part to choose this path because it also, a lot of those savings are now embedded. We will not need to have a 3-shift operation anymore in our operating budget. It also allows us a lot of future flexibility because we've modernized our plant equipment. We can now utilize more modern solutions to both producing heat and then also heat exchange, heat recovery technology. Most of that technology is being developed around hot water as the basis, not steam. So we're able to give the college the gift of future flexibility as well.
Well, to me, it's almost a no-brainer. Not only are you helping the environment, but you're also reducing your operating, your maintenance costs, your utility costs, which you can put into things that are beneficial for the university.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talked a couple of days ago, we talked a little bit about the master planning that went in with this. You had plant equipment that you needed to do the master planning. You can design the buildings now with more flexibility in there. You're reducing carbon footprint. I mean, this is a win-win-win all the way around, I would think.
It certainly is. I mean, we were inspired by other schools that paved the way, but I can see now with the completion of the Carleton project, which is at a small liberal arts scale, there are many similar institutions either considering or planning or even implementing the same thing, which helps to just prove that the idea does pencil out for other institutions besides just Carleton.
And that's important. I know you had gotten your inspiration from Ball State, from Miami of Ohio, but what are some of the other schools that are piggybacking onto the Second Nature movement that started a number of years ago?
Well, there are hundreds of schools signed up to that commitment, and I feel like Second Nature has really been a force to bring us all together in a collective action mindset. So we learn from each other, we have friendly competition, there are conferences and workshops that have really helped gel this movement of reducing carbon in higher ed. So we're seeing that broadly. More specifically, colleges like Oberlin have already started the process of transitioning off of steam onto hot water with geothermal. We have schools like Smith and Swarthmore and UMass Amherst that are in the planning process and are presenting these plans to their board of trustees for evaluation and approval. So we're just seeing a movement. I think we were not the bleeding edge. We had very reputable institutions like Ball State and Miami, Ohio that went before us. But I think it's still a leading edge of a movement that you're going to see roll across the United States in terms of moving off steam and onto more of a geothermal hot water solution.
Can anybody put a geothermal in, or do you need to be at certain places in the country?
Your geology and your groundwater flow will impact how effective your geothermal bore fields can be. And so if they're very favorable, you can have a smaller bore field or a shallower bore field, which is less expensive. So the first step in any of these projects is certainly doing a test bore to explore those parameters and working with an engineering firm that has deep experience with these projects.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of brings us to a step by step of how a college would start through this process. So at a 50,000 foot level, how would you, if you were consulting to a college about doing something like this, what would you advise them the natural steps they should be taking?
Certainly. I mean, we started small. Carleton started, we saw a conference presentation on the Ball State project. It turned out the engineering firm behind that project was situated an hour away from our campus. So we invited them to give us a presentation and look more specifically at our situation. And we started with a concept study. So we didn't invest, hundreds of thousands of dollars in a big design effort right away. We took a modest step. We turned over all of our heating and cooling data, our electrical data, kind of our past projects that had been completed, and also a look ahead at the next 5 to 10 years of projects. And the engineering firm helped us look at what was possible, what was worth studying, both from a cost and an energy and a carbon standpoint. And then they were able to kind of lead us through the next steps of getting into a deeper evaluation when we had that first go, no-go test and that said, this might work at Carleton.
Okay. So you essentially did a small pilot project.
Mm-hmm. Right. We did a study.
Yeah. You work with an engineering company who specializes in this kind of thing, did a study, looked like it was going to be favorable. How did you get buy-in from the board and the administration on being able to ramp this up?
Yeah, I think there are multiple factors. One, I'm just grateful that the board and the administration started this process with an open mind. We had done a very detailed strategic plan for the college in 2010 or 2012. And then we had followed that with a very detailed campus plan. So a facilities master plan, which said, here's the buildings you're going to build, here's the buildings you're going to renovate, and here's the buildings you're going to demolish in favor of new construction. So we had a very good idea of how the campus would evolve, and that was a very solid foundation for the utility plan, which came next. So it was very conscientious to first, let's figure out what we're going to build and how big we're going to be, and then let's plan the utilities to respond to that. And that allowed us in facilities to have a very clear objective and a very clear framework within which to work. How much square footage do we need to serve? And when will these new buildings be coming online? Because that too was a catalyst for us. We were able to piggyback construction of the geothermal plant on construction of a new science building. So we're digging a big hole for a science building, and we decided to dig a bigger hole, just one more level down, to add the geothermal equipment. And the merging of those two projects, one which was already planned and one our geothermal project, which was proposed, those two projects coming together was a magic moment that really set us off on this journey.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds to me like you had buy-in from the board, you had buy-in from the administration from the beginning. They were open to seeing what the data was. And it was critical to do the data and do that small study going forward. And then marry things with the overall master plan for the institution.
Yes, it all proceeded in a fairly logical progression. And again, we didn't take any huge leaps. We went from a concept study to a schematic design where we backed up some of the initial assumptions. We went from a schematic design to design development where we added more detail, and we brought in a contractor to help with pricing that was based on market costs, real construction costs and real construction phasing. And so at each step of the way, we brought the board along. We presented to the president and the administration so that they felt the process was very transparent as we built on the past work.
Mm-hmm. And the benefits of doing this obviously are huge from a cost perspective. You're reducing that. I mean, some of the numbers we came up with before, reducing your utility bills by 12%, your central plant maintenance costs by 30%. The other one, which we didn't touch on earlier, was a 68% reduction in your carbon footprint.
That's true. I'm glad you highlighted that, Drumm. That's very important to Carleton, and that's the accumulation of the wind turbine. Now we have two wind turbines. It's the geothermal, which again recycles heat, so we need less input. And then number 3, we're seeing our public grid decarbonize or get greener much faster than we anticipated when we wrote the Climate Action Plan 10 years ago. So that's also helping Carleton's carbon footprint dive down into this 68% reduction range.
hmm Well, what most people don't stop and think about is, yeah, we get all this power from the power grid and everything else, but how do the power plants generate the power? It's through natural gas, it's through coal, it's through nuclear and other ways as well. And so if you can reduce the need for generation from carbon producing mechanisms, natural gas, I mean, even pumping natural gas and oil out of the ground
Right.
creates more carbon. If we
hmm
can reduce that, we can go a long way to hitting some of the climate goals that we really need to make the planet more sustainable.
Yeah, that's one of the really elegant things that over my tenure at Carlton, the last decade, I'm seeing the strategic plan for our utility company align with the climate goals of the college. So they're pledging to be 80% carbon free by 2030, which is very soon, and 100% carbon free by 2050. So if we're able to get clean electricity from our public grid and we're starting to pull our heat production away from natural gas through the boilers and move it to electric sources like the heat pump, we're engaging in what's called strategic electrification. So we're electrifying our heat sources in order to really capture the benefits of the public grid getting greener.
And I'm curious, how much coordination did it take between the college and your utility companies to be able to make this happen?
Well, really on the thermal side with the geothermal project, most of that was internal planning at Carleton. We did have to coordinate with our utilities because our natural gas use will decrease and our electricity use will increase because we're using less natural gas boilers and more of our electric heat pump. So we had to coordinate with them on meter sizing and also just keep them informed so that they could be prepared as to kind of how this might change. But for the most part, there were no permits or barriers from the utility company when we did the geothermal project. It's more complicated when we installed the wind turbines because we have to have an interconnection agreement with the public utility that says, okay, when you produce more power than you can use, some of that's going to come back to the public grid. So they need to study that and engineer that solution. That one's a little more complicated.
So I'm curious. You guys are in Minnesota. I would have thought with all the stuff that you're doing that you're actually located in California.
Well, Minnesota's a pretty progressive state too, Drumm.
You are, and I'm totally impressed with what you guys are doing up there.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
So we're coming down to the end of the time. Anything else that we should cover before we go into our 3 takeaways?
I just want to encourage other administrators, other facilities directors, other energy managers to consider these possibilities and don't hesitate to reach out to others who've done it before you. That's how we got the courage to proceed with our plan, and we're now helping others proceed with theirs.
Very good. Which leads us a perfect thing into 3 takeaways. What would you tell presidents and boards about what they need to think about to help out with projects like this or implement?
Yeah, I certainly think putting climate at the forefront of your thinking, in embedding it in strategic plans is more important than ever. And the 3 takeaways for me would be, number 1, the climate needs us now. This condition that we found ourselves in is urgent. It's rapidly deteriorating, and despite all the optimism, it's an all hands on deck moment. Higher ed needs to unite to formulate climate solutions and, again, role model those. 2, there are real cost savings to be had, and that is certainly in the area of saving energy, saving money on utilities, and saving money on operating costs. But 3, it's also a risk management consideration because we're not only developing our resilience and adaptation plans for more air conditioning and better flood planning, we're also mitigating the risk of being exposed to energy market volatility. We're seeing that now in Russia. And we're also limiting the risk of being exposed to future carbon taxes because in some form, at some amount, they will come. We don't know when, we don't know how, but they're coming. And so the less carbon we're producing, the more we insulate ourselves from that risk.
Those are 3 great takeaways. Thank you, Martha. So what's next for you? What's next for Carlton?
Boy, that's a fun question, Drumm. Carleton is really recognizing that its 2011 Climate Action Plan is out of date. And so we're gearing up to form a committee and all the proper procedures to develop a new climate action plan, which will reflect the future, the next 10 years. That's going to be very exciting. I hope it includes some on-site renewable energy to further green our grid, and also some really creative ways to recover heat. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But even more importantly, we really want to see a holistic plan that infuses sustainability goals and a lens of sustainability within every department and every decision maker at the college.
Well, that's great. Martha, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a fascinating conversation for me, and I look forward to doing it again sometime in the future when we hear about more great things Carleton's doing.
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity, Drumm. It's a pleasure to share our story.
Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to Martha Larson, Manager of Campus Energy and Sustainability at Carleton College, and for her sharing how colleges and universities can save big bucks on their energy bills while helping the environment. Our next guests are Dr. Dick Light and Allison Jegla, authors of the new book Becoming Great Universities: Small Steps for Sustained Excellence. This book was just released a few days ago, and Dick and Allison will be joining us to discuss many examples of colleges and universities who are building cultures of innovation, something that higher ed needs more than anything else right now. Until next time.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.